Hello, everyone. Welcome to the YouTube channel and also the Patreon podcast. I'm David Chen, and joining me today is Dan Gvozden. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm ready for another trip through the multiverse, David, and welcome back from your vacation. I'm eager to do this live again with you.
Indeed. So, we are today, as usual, on this channel talking about the latest episode of Marvel's What If, which is streaming right now on Disney Plus. This week, we'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 4. What if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? Whatever that means. We'll be discussing it here and spoiling everything about this week's episode. I do want to point out that how this works is we are going to be recapping this show on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/DaveChensky, but you can also listen to a high quality audio podcast version over at patreon.com/DaveChen. So if you are interested in supporting my work and also listening to a high quality audio podcast version of this, patreon.com/DaveChen. Be sure to also check out Dan Gvozden's The Amazing Spider Talk podcast over at amazingspidertalk.com. Now, there's a couple of kind of administrative notes I want to cover before we get started here. First of all, when I have launched podcasts in the past, and when you and I have done a podcast, Dan Gvozden, we have no idea how good the show is going to be, how many people are going to be interested in hearing us talk about it. We don't know any of these things, right? But in the case of Captain America, Falcon and Winter Soldier, I should say, and Loki, like thousands of people tuned in every week to hear us discuss it, even if we didn't like the show,
Yeah.
which frequently we didn't. And this is very gratifying, and we're very grateful for that. I will say that our numbers for this What If show have been lower than the other shows, and I honestly am not sure if we should keep doing it, just because I don't know. Maybe it's very popular. Like maybe people enjoy watching the What If shows, but like generally, a good recap podcast depends on like serialized storytelling and
Right.
things where you can like propose fan theories and speculate and things like that. And that just basically the things that make for a good recap podcast or show don't really apply as much to What If, in my opinion. And so I think that's partly why people aren't tuning in this much, because this is, by the way, probably the show we've been the most positive of out of the three shows, right? So it's
Well,
definitely not a positivity, in my opinion, right?
I was gonna say like maybe people just want to hear us dump on something, but the funny thing also to respond to you that is like I think this episode is the first actual episode that perhaps hinted that maybe there is some continuity between the episodes of
Mm,
this show. So like maybe
indeed.
we are actually headed into the content that we need to keep the fires burning, you know?
So our current plan is we're gonna obviously recap this week's episode. We'll recap next week's episode as well, and then I think there's like 9 episodes this season, right? 10
Yeah.
episodes this season. So we're gonna like kind of reassess there. But if you want, Dylan Tilly in the chat is saying, "What if you kept doing recaps?" It's a good question. Maybe we would have found ourselves in a whole. Maybe some Disney executive would have seen, episode 8 recap and been like, "Get these guys a Disney Plus show." But we're gonna do this week. We're gonna do next week, and then we're gonna kind of assess and see how it's going. And we may or may not continue. We're really grateful for the engagement we've gotten, but I just don't know if enough people care about our thoughts on the show for us to like really finish the swing on this. All that said, let's get into the people who do care about what we had to say about the last couple episodes. So we didn't record the last couple episodes in real time. We kind of uploaded them, and as a result, we weren't able to address things that we'd actually gotten wrong in the last couple recaps. So there's a couple things I wanted to address. For season 1, episode 2 of What If, I think you and I both speculated that Chadwick Boseman, this would be his last performance. It is true. My understanding is that Chadwick Boseman's last actor performance is going to be as part of the What If series. However, my understanding is he will show up in future episodes of What If. So episode 2 was not going to be his last performance. So wanted to make that clear. Does that
That makes
match?
me think we're getting like a team up of some of these characters.
Potentially. Potentially. The other thing is, I think we implied, if not outright said, that Michael Douglas did not do his own voice acting in season 1, episode 3.
I don't
And
know if I remember that, but fair enough.
well, we got a lot of comments of people saying Michael Douglas voiced himself in What If season 1 episode 3. Now,
Got it.
for reasons I'm not going to get into, at the time we recorded season 1 episode 3 recap, we may not have known that that was the case, but now we're aware, and sorry for the error. So, a couple of things I just wanted to like clear up. I will say, speaking of voice acting, you know, we wanted to have a segment on the show each week where we evaluate the voice acting of all the kind of sound-alikes that are on the episode. And I think this is the first episode where every major character is voiced by the same person that played them in the films, right?
Yeah, and I think it's to the episode's benefit. I mean,
100%.
it really feels like well, a what if, but it really feels like an actual extension of the Doctor Strange movie. In many ways, it like feels like something that could have happened in the Doctor Strange movie and then been undone or something like that. Like I could see this as a movie. You know, it's yeah, it's really a benefit to the show, I think.
Agreed. There's not a single Sebastian Stan-esque performance among them. They're all
No.
really, really good. I mean, I think I have started to kind of notice that like I don't have any actual information, but my guess is that they didn't get all these actors into the studio at once, right? Like just logistically, it's a lot easier to record the performances separately. And sometimes I can't help but think about that when I'm listening. Like, does this sound like these characters are actually interacting, or
Right.
are they just like kind of saying lines into the ether? And like, does that affect the performance at all? On that note, by the way, did you see this kind of mini controversy around Drax voicing himself in the What If?
I did, right? He said they didn't even reach out to him, which seems really odd to me.
So
If that's
there's a
true.
yeah. So there was a question about like why somebody tweeted at Dave Bautista like why did you not voice Drax and What If? And I think Dave Bautista tweeted something along the lines of let's start with I was never asked. And then James Gunn responded, "What?" And that's about as much as we got out of that interaction.
I will say, just by following Dave Bautista's Twitter account, he does seem like a salty character to work with. Like, he says things that I'm like about his future in acting and like the end of Drax that make me feel like either he's difficult or they're being difficult with him, and I can't really tell. But he seems very salty on Twitter, and I don't know if that's anything to go by, but like,
I don't think it is anything to go by, Dan.
okay,
I mean, I think that here's what I'll say. I agree he's salty. I also think he's probably one of the most outspoken, like critical of Disney people that's out there right now.
right,
Which is a
absolutely.
very challenging line for any actor to walk right now, given how powerful Disney is, and given that he is actively. My understanding is he's going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, right? So like,
Right.
it's hard for an actor to like critique a company like Disney and still expect to maintain their industry relationships in the same way that he is. But my sense is he DGAF, like he's going to say what he says. But there's also like a lot of people that are difficult in the industry. Like Dan,
Right.
this is episode 4. Like, look at all the voice actors. Like, you're telling me like none of those people are difficult. You know,
Hey,
I just
no,
don't. I don't
I'm
believe
not
it.
saying that, but like if I had to guess, I think rephrasing it, I would say like he seems the most openly critical of Disney.
Oh, that's true. That is very
Of the bunch.
different than
Yeah.
he is difficult to work with, though.
Yeah, yeah. But like in that, like he's the only one who allows us a portal into that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I don't see other people tweeting the things that he's tweeting, so it's like, I don't know. I mean, there was that whole hubbub about like Taika Waititi having a threesome and stuff like that, but like for the most part, Disney keeps a pretty like their coworkers under wraps in a way. So anyway, I'm sorry if I came out wrong, but he does sound like like he's pretty like honest about how he feels.
Let's dive into this episode, season 1, episode 4. What if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? Overall thoughts, Dan Gvozden.
First of all, I think great title. It gets at it, but it doesn't really tell you entirely what it is that is happening here. I thought this was the best episode yet. I mean, for me, it's just a slow ramp up. in quality for this
Mm-hmm.
show.
Mm-hmm.
I love just kind of how weird they allowed themselves to go here and really dive into, like, well, to say it, more strange part of the Marvel universe with increasingly complicated mythology and rules and things like that, but still kind of anchor it all in a really solid character journey. In a way that I think like a good Rick and Morty episode will, where they just
Mm-hmm.
introduce idea after idea and expect you to roll with it.
Yeah.
Um, to me, this is the first, at least in writing, uh, like the first episode to truly, finally unlock that classic what if formula, which what if stories are kind of known, at least in the comics, known for having really dark endings
Mm.
and a clear change in the timeline.
Kind of like
And
Twilight Zone-esque. Like,
absolutely.
wow, that was, oh, we found out the alternative and it wasn't good, basically. Like, yeah.
Exactly. But at least here I felt like the outcome wasn't good. But it didn't, I don't feel like it threw any of the characters under the bus. I thought everybody acted in a way that I
Well,
would
it
believe.
threw Rachel McAdams under the car, like multiple times, or under multiple death-causing reasons in a way that I
Right.
thought was like so over the top. This was like the mega fridging episode.
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
not only does she die in all these like horrifying ways, but also uh her death is what drives the main action of the episode. You know what I'm saying?
And is the anchor point for the entire universe, it
Oh yeah.
seems.
Literally, the universe's existence depends on her dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing can happen unless she dies. You know?
That would be like one of my main, like, and only real complaints about this episode is that they go out of their way to painfully tell us that her death is what sparks him to become the Sorcerer Supreme. And if not for her death, he never can become the Sorcerer Supreme, so the universe gets destroyed or he creates a time paradox. But the problem with that is it's in the title that we know that he becomes a Sorcerer Supreme by losing his hands. So it's like this couldn't possibly go any other way. And it's like, well, the only other way we know is a possibility. So it kind of like undercuts its own intentions, I think.
Right, right.
But
So we'll get into that momentarily, but yeah, what I appreciated about this episode was I actually I think we have a disagreement here. I actually liked the animation style. Like, I thought this is probably some of the most creative animation we've seen in the series so far. Just with all the different creatures that are coming up and that he's interacting with, and the design of the library and all that stuff. I really liked all that. And I liked how dark it was. Like, I liked that it actually ends in a really, really sad place, which many Marvel things don't allow themselves to do. Maybe I'm not remembering that, but I feel like most Marvel things end on at least a note of triumph, or at least leave open the possibility of some kind of redemption. This did not at all. I
yeah, I
also,
mean,
yeah, go
the
ahead.
closest to this, I think, is like Infinity War's ending.
Yes, which like isn't really even, Infinity War arguably is part one of a two-parter, right?
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is, the whole time we've been doing these recaps, Dan, you've been wanting there to be more um, involvement of the
Watu.
Watcher, right?
Yeah.
Watu, right? Is that what his name is?
Yeah. Watu.
Watu, and like he should like be part of the show. And this was the first time where he's almost interfered with events in the show. Actually, not almost. Like he did interfere in the sense that he interacted with one of the characters in the show, right? So I thought maybe this is Dan getting what he wants in this episode. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this episode to me was like this is where I was sold. Like the show officially has me now.
yeah,
Like, in terms of the animation, I agree with you. I love seeing the magic effects and the creatures, and I think anytime the show is like doing some kind of action moment or major, scene transition or something like that, it's really strong visually. It's the facial animation being so rigid that
yeah,
draws attention to me.
yeah,
And weirdly enough, these episodes are very character oriented. It's a lot of people talking to each other.
yeah.
So when so much attention is brought to that, it still just sticks out to me. I just wish there was another way to make this more expressive, because you've got this great, I actually think really strong performances, vocal performances, but when the faces are so leaden, it robs it a little bit. Like I could just see the potential here, for what this could be. Because this is a great story that they're telling, and I think it just needs a little bit more support from the animation to put it over the top.
I agree with you about the facial expressions being a little bit lacking in the animation. In particular, there's the Rachel McAdams character, and like at the end, she's supposed to be like really horrified, and I was just like, the vocal performance is great. I don't know that the animation is really selling it for me, but I thought overall, like the wild out there creatures and all that stuff, like I loved all that. So there's a lot to like about the animation as well as there always has been throughout this whole series. So
Yeah, absolutely.
okay, let's get into it. In the show notes, you write, here's a radical take. What if Doctor Strange wasn't a pompous ass before his accident? Tell me more about this show note, Dan Gvozden.
Well, I mean, I don't know how long it's been since you've watched the Doctor Strange movie, but I mean, he is insufferable at the beginning of that movie. I mean, you really don't like him, and he is really, really awful to Christine.
Mm-hmm.
There's one particular scene where she like goes to meet him in his apartment, and it's heartbreaking, like almost borderline abusive. And here, like, you can see a real spark in them, and so in my mind, initially I thought, okay, this is kind of like a what if Doctor Strange wasn't as arrogant as he was, and they had a bit more of a spark, and you can see that reflected in the real divergence point here, which is that Christine accepts his invitation to his speaking engagement, which she denies in the movie. And so, I thought it's nice, but I think it's more character based than just like a flip of a coin. Like I think he's actually a nicer guy in this, and his journey's almost backwards. He starts off nice and becomes arrogant by the end of the story.
Mm. Also, you point out kind of Easter egg like that he's getting an award for hemispherectomy, right? Like performing hemispherectomy, which is the splitting of hemispheres in the brain, which is something akin to what the Ancient One does in this episode, right?
Right. I thought I took note of that because it's different than the movie. And I guess it took me a little bit after watching it to kind of put that together. Like, oh, thematically, that's kind of interesting too. Like by the end of this, we have, I don't know if it's right brain, left brain, and all your evil is in one half of your brain, and all your good is in the other. But I thought it was, it's the kind of attention to detail that I think makes the writing in this episode and some of the other places in What If a little more special than what it could have been, just as like a simple boilerplate kind of thing.
That was another thing I liked about the episode is that the conflict that arises is thematically tied to Doctor Strange's personality, right? That like the idea of always wanting to fix everything. Him being a surgeon, an arrogant surgeon. Oh, if you're a surgeon, you can fix things, you can make things better. And then like him wanting to fix things being the thing that leads to his undoing. I like it all thematically ties in together in a way that's pretty satisfying. So the divergence is not only Christina accepting his invitation to his speaking engagement, but also that she dies in the car accident instead of his hands being destroyed.
Yeah.
So she's not even in the car in the movie. Is that right?
No, she's not at all.
Got it. And then what happens to her in the movie, by the way? Do you remember?
She just keeps working at the hospital. I mean,
she's just chilling, living her life.
I mean, his hands are just destroyed, right? So he's got no real reason to interact with her. I think she comes and visits him in the hospital and sees his hands all messed up, and he yells at her because he's an awful person. I thought it was interesting in this episode, kind of like yada yadas past like the whole plot of the Doctor Strange movie.
Right, because the idea of the Doctor Strange movie is that his hands are destroyed. That's why he sought refuge in the mystic arts to like be able to use his hands again. But if that never happened, why would he become Doctor Strange in the What If universe? And the movie the episode kind of yada yadas over that, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's even more specific than that because I think they try to justify it where they're like, he wants to learn how to bring someone back from the dead. So, of course, magic is the only way to do it. But the only way he was able to find like where to get that magic is because he like had a former patient of his that recovered in a way that was like beyond what surgery might
Right.
typically do, who he bumps into on the basketball court. And
And
so like
instead, in this universe, he bumps into them on the basketball court, and he's like, "Hey, do you think that magic can bring back a dead person?"
yeah,
So
he just randomly bumps into a zombie and is like, how did you become like this?
there's actually multiple divergences, right? In
Yeah.
this episode, there is Christine decides to go with him to the ball or whatever. She dies, not his hands, and then also her death is the absolute. What is it called? Like
It's
it's
like a
called like an
fixed point in
absolute event
time.
or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolute point in time, something like that. Like
Right.
basically, not only is her death something that happened, it is something that has to happen,
Yeah.
right? In this universe. So there's like multiple divergences. It's not just like one. You and I were talking earlier about how elegant it was that it was like one decision. This one I do not think falls into that category. It is
Um,
multiple things need to change.
I guess, but like I think the way it's always been portrayed is that like it's one decision that then has cascading events, right?
Hmm.
So like
But the
I
fact that
still
it's like
think
an
it's one
absolute
decision.
point in time, like that's not just one. That is the true divergence. Is that it's
It,
like her
is
death
her
is
death?
necessary, right?
Yeah, okay. I mean that's fair. But that's where we get into this complicated new narrative that they're adding on top of this. It's not like a rule that we established in Loki, and I have some thoughts on that and like how this kind of like reworks our understanding of time travel. But we can talk about that as we get there.
Yeah, it's interesting that like I think by the end of I don't know phase 4 of Marvel, there's going to be like 18 more rules about time travel. We've got the time variance authority. We got absolute events, that are immovable. And we'll get we'll get the Watcher, right? Watu and like his whole situation, what his real, they're just introducing multiple other levels of reality at a fairly fast clip here.
Yeah, I mean, if the Watcher is like watching all these events in the timeline or whatever, like what was he doing before the branching of the multiverse? Was he just observing one timeline? Like in the comics, there's a different Watcher for each universe, where here's
Mm-hmm.
just one guy. It
Mm-hmm.
seems at least. Um, and so is he watching all these different universes? I don't really know how his stuff works necessarily in this. At least right now.
So in this episode, the events of Doctor Strange pretty much play out exactly as is, excepting what we've already discussed about the hands not being killed or not being destroyed, and Christine dying instead. And then he's like, you know what? I have the time stone. I'm going to go back in time and try to prevent Christine from getting killed. And then there's like a fairly, I just have to say, hilarious sequence where he tries to stop her from being killed, but like I just thought it was unintentionally funny because of how ridiculous all these scenarios were. Like
Yeah.
because it's kind of the cinematic language of like Bill Murray killing himself in Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Like it's just like let's take this path. Oh, this time we went to the diner and there was a robber and it's just like this kind of makes it more interesting that they yada yada over the like how these events led to Dormammu getting defeated, because it was that important. Like you know what I'm saying? Like it deeply inspired Doctor Strange to do his thing, and that's why it had to happen, I guess. Right?
Right.
Any thoughts on this sequence before we move on?
I mean, for as unintentionally funny as it may be, and I think it's a little like knowing, once you get to like she dies in like the building blowing up or her like apartment building, I think that's like so over the top. It's meant to be a little bit funny, or a little bit tongue in cheek. And I thought the construction of the sequence was entertaining.
Mm,
The way the montage of it all was put together. I mean, I'm always appreciative when any piece of medium can establish a new language for itself, and how it communicates things for you and creates shorthand. And I like that here. It reminded me of like the introduction of a new character in Into the Spider-Verse, except way less fun because it's someone dying over and over again.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think this show does a lot with a little. It's got a short runtime, but it communicates like big ideas very quickly, and I think that's a really tough thing to do.
Let's acknowledge a couple of comments in the live chat. Jim McMahon says, in the movie, he avoids surgeries that are too hard because they could ruin his reputation. She clearly only goes to his speech with him because he took this risky surgery. Is that in the text of the episode? I think that's a solid interpretation. I don't know if that's specifically explained in the episode.
I think she suggests as much.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a really good read.
Yeah. So nicely suggested, Jim, and I think that's worth noting. I also really like what Singular Rookhart here says. He says, he or she says, I expected that that Doctor Strange was going to beat the fixed point by making himself heartless prior to the speaking engagement, so that Christine would not join him, and we would get the events as seen in the film. That would be really interesting, right? Like the idea is like him, like he's like, I gotta sacrifice my hands to make this happen, and then it plays out as Doctor Strange the movie. That would have been really cool.
I mean, I think there's some cool implications too. Like the one where he's just sitting alone and never shows up for her date is an interesting thing because it suggests like he loves her enough to not even get involved with her life. Like to me, that's kind of a real sacrifice.
Yeah.
And, I think it goes a long way to suggest like how much he loves her, even just through like simple inaction.
Yeah. The Vicious Ocean in the chat says, I thought it was pretty bleak. Glad you both got a laugh though. I mean,
it's bleak.
It's bleak, but it's just the style of it was almost like, let's put it this way. If you were going to edit that scene in a way to make it ridiculous and over the top, you wouldn't have changed anything. That's kind of what my supposition is there.
You could play yakety sax.
You would have played yakety sax over it, and that's the only difference.
Can I bring up the question of like how fate works in the MCU, because that's not really something that we've seen play out, much, especially now that we are working with the idea of these new timelines and things, because every time he goes back and tries to change it, it's not like there's like a karmic retribution no matter what, right? He can't stop her from dying, but we just got done with a show that said the exact opposite, which is go back and change stuff and create new universes, right? So there's something that's pushing back here, and it took me a while to kind of figure it out. And I think the reason this is not a like divergent event of him creating all these things is that he's just using the time stone, just like Thanos did, and he did with the apple, which is to like just rewind time. But he's not changing any event. The reason Thanos could change the event after rewinding time is because he had the Infinity Gauntlet with all the stones in it.
Right. He had like the Reality Stone or whatever.
Right. Exactly. So that makes him able to create this divergence. And also it was always fated to happen, apparently. But here I think he's just rewinding time. So if she were to live, he suddenly, in this universe, it suggests he wouldn't become the Sorcerer Supreme, which would then create a time paradox. Because he couldn't go back in time and create and undo this if he never became the Sorcerer Supreme. So, by the end of the show, when he does save her, that's what causes the universe to collapse in on itself. Is there's a time paradox that's been created here. But then you have questions about other time machines that allow it, like the Tempads and the Avengers time machine from Endgame. And my guess as to that is like maybe machines, like time machines can actually go back and change time. I don't know. I mean, I just keep thinking about the scene from Loki where we see the drawer open and there's all those Infinity Stones.
I don't know that this is even worth delving into, Dan, because theoretically this is a what if. We don't even know if absolute points exist in other universes at all. It just... They clearly like kind of created a whole new set of rules for this episode. So, whether or not he's actually altering the timeline or not, I don't think is material.
Yeah, I mean it's true, but this is a new concept. Like fate is a new concept, and if there's one thing the Marvel movies I think have been good about is, if they establish a rule, they're pretty consistent about it.
I don't know. I'd be surprised if like the concepts introduced in this carry over. Maybe they will. Maybe we'll find out other absolute points. I don't know.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is, I think it is like logically consistent within what they've already established, right?
Mhm.
Like we've seen that the stones themselves are just paperweights in the
Right.
TVA, you know. So like their power is truly limited, you know, and this is kind of showcasing the limits of that.
I think that's a good call out. I think that's a good call out. So anyway, Ancient One comes and is like explaining what's going on, and she says like it's an absolute point. You can't change this fridging, unfortunately. This is a perma fridge that needs to happen. So
It's a
uh,
freezer.
it's terrible, Dan.
Okay.
So then he's like, well, maybe if I go back to this old library of Cagliostro, I can find a way to get enough power that I can stop this absolute event from happening. That's his goal, right?
Right. And we saw Cagliostro was introduced in the first Doctor Strange movie when he finds the like evil time book in the library, which ultimately is stolen by the villain, or at least 3 pages of it are stolen. That which then allows them to like call forth Dormammu and all of that stuff. So like this is a known quantity, although we've not ever seen it in this kind of detail.
So he goes theoretically goes back in time. Not sure why the Ancient One wouldn't look for him there, because I think she knows what his goal is. But whatever. Finds Obeng, who's the librarian, and then he decides like, hey, I'm gonna absorb the power of all these mystic beings, and he spends seemingly many years absorbing these powers, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
In the comics, Obeng is believed to be Cagliostro. It's never confirmed,
mm-hmm.
but you know, here I think it is because Cagliostro in the comics is this sorcerer who uses like vampiric powers to live a very long time, and we see Doctor Strange age quite a bit or go through a lot of time, and Obeng is kind of there, and he says he's been there for centuries, which suggests he has some kind of immortality
Yeah,
or at least long life. So I think the implication there is that Obeng is Cagliostro.
interesting. So he absorbs all these powers, and then he can basically theoretically live a really long time. But then Obeng is like, actually, humans were designed to die. You know, did you know this? And Doctor Strange learns that lesson, kind of, not really. Actually, he doesn't really learn any lessons until the very end of this episode. So then he comes to understand that the Ancient One split him into two halves, two coexisting halves in the same timeline slash universe, which I thought was really cool. Like that's a cool idea, right? Is
It
like,
also kind of came out of nowhere.
yeah,
Like
another like huge, implication idea dropped like right into the middle of the episode. But I like the concept is like, ooh, I never thought about it that way. Like, what would that even mean? So yeah, and then they have a big fight, and I think that you have a problem because you have a storytelling problem in this episode where you want this fight to have some kind of tension, but you've also just spent a lot of time showing us Doctor Strange absorbing power from like thousands of creatures, and so it's like if they're even remotely evenly matched, what was the point of absorbing all the power? Do you know what I mean? Like, I would expect like Doctor Strange to be godlike at that point. But yeah, how did you think about what did you think of how this fight played out? Basically,
I thought it was a lot of fun. I I like that they stuck with some of the like early Doctor Strange magic powers from his movie, like the visualization of those. I do think that the visualization of Doctor Strange got better as time went on. Like the stuff he does in Infinity War and Endgame, I think it's like endlessly more fun to look at than what he did in the first Doctor Strange movie.
mm-hmm.
But I think they're adhering to that timeline a little bit. But I thought it was fun, and I like that they created this kind of like rune mask that he wore to at least give him some protection and ward off what you were describing, which is the immense power. So it at least gave me some kind of understanding of, as opposed to like the end of WandaVision, where people are just hurling magic balls at each other. And I don't really know what that means, or like I have no real way to read who's winning the fight. At least I could keep track of the runes on the good Doctor Strange's face to say like, okay, well, how well is he doing in this battle
Yeah.
based on how many runes remain? And I think it gave it some good, tension up to the last bit where he has the one right in the middle of his forehead, and you think maybe he could have won. It created a tension there that I think could have very easily, like you said, been completely flat, and it worked for me.
Yeah, Chris DeLilla addresses my criticism by saying it was one badass protection spell.
Yeah.
He also loved the rune letters coming off of Good Strange every time he got hit. That was kind of cool. That's like a cool idea that was executed pretty well. So then, they have a big fight, and Evil Strange wins. And I was surprised. I was like, oh wow, they found a way for the evil one to win, and he gets what he wants, but then like he's also morphed into this horrifying creature by the time he saves Christine, he's morphed into this horrifying creature. He also kind of has a little dialogue with Uatu, who kind of says like Uatu kind of identifies the limits of his power, right? He's like, please come in and save the world, and he's like, I can't do anything, right? I can't interfere, right? That's the basics of what he says.
Right. Yeah. Or if I interfere with you, it puts other universes at risk.
Right, and then the visual of the universe kind of closing in on itself like a reverse Big Bang, I thought was really cool. Just the idea of like everyone ceasing to be because he like made this change,
Yeah, and it kind of looks like the symbiote from the Venom comics, and there's a character named Null in Venom comics who's like the god of darkness, and like he exists before the Big Bang, and he like the symbiotes are a representation of his darkness, and in my mind I was like, oh, this is kind of neat. Like it looks like they're employing the character Null, who's a very popular modern character here, and his kind of idea of like symbiote looking darkness creeping in. I thought that was a really neat visual, and the visual of people kind of evaporating and like the tendrils of darkness kind of leaving their body as the universe is collapsing. Cool visuals. I mean,
that
like
was really cool. Although apparently it didn't change Wong's ability to kind of collaborate with him during that time.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool idea. That's like. And the Strange, the Strange movie and now this episode have always been really good about introducing new visual concepts into the Marvel universe.
Right.
So I like that.
I can't wait to see what Sam Raimi does with it.
Yeah, Sebastian in the chat says, I read it. He read the final fight scene as Good Strange knew he couldn't beat Evil Strange. He was hoping to last long enough to change his mind, which I think is a good read on it. And I just feel like, I don't know. I just feel like if you're building up Evil Strange like that much, like he's absorbing power for centuries. Like I'm like, what did that get him ultimately? If like a decent protection spell could like stop him, but it's kind of like it's just difficult when you're having characters that are really OP like Captain Marvel in this series. It's like it's hard to invent excuses for them not winning completely all the time.
Yeah, but we also don't know what it means to absorb those things. It could have been like a monkey paw situation where it's like you gain power, but you have another weakness of some kind. Like, I mean, I'll admit it tricked me when we saw the image of Strange and Christine kind of like reconnecting before he denied that she was actually Christine. Like, I was like, oh, this is a kind of upbeat ending. Like he got what he wanted. So like, I'll admit I was kind of tricked there.
That was cool. That was a nice moment. So
yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of like great things about this episode. Overall, I quite like the episode. Again, it's not. I think it's kind of problematic. The fridging component, the fact that like in Strange the movie, it's about like these people of color helping out this white dude explore this other culture. Like it kind of repeats that. I think that movie handled it about as good as it could given the ingredients they were given, but this kind of continued that a little bit. But yeah, I overall quite liked the episode, and I loved how dark the ending is, which is basically, I mean, the Watcher character is like, and this is what can happen from a single decision. It's like, well, wasn't really a single decision. It was this death being made into an absolute point, or an absolute event that could not be moved. Like that was really the problem. But yeah,
Right. I mean, but it's neat to see that like I don't think that they destroyed the strange character. Like I believe that he might be so moved by love to give it all. I mean, in some ways it's heroic, also selfish, but that's part of the character and who he is. And I don't feel like they betrayed him at all, putting him this way. And even just to see his remorse at the end when he realized the
yeah,
true
yeah,
ramifications was really heartbreaking. And I think in terms of like emotional connection, this episode got me the most. I feel like you know all the other ones have been kind of neat up to this point.
mm-hmm,
This one
mm-hmm.
felt like a story that like actually like uh, enthralled me in its plot and its characters' emotions. And I think that's kind of like the best you could hope for from like a what if story like this.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I think that one of the comments that I read on one of our reviews was about like how Thanos in episode 2, like T'Challa was able to change his mind not even by force, but just like by arguing with him theoretically, and like how that was like some people like interpreted that as kind of betrayal of the character, or being like super glib with the character. You know what I'm saying?
I could see that.
Yeah, I don't feel this episode does that though. I feel this episode, at the very least, honors the character of Doctor Strange that we know from the movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that like the movie lets this episode down is that like the Christine relationship to me was never one that I could imagine Doctor Strange throwing his whole life and universe away for,
Yeah,
as established in the movie. But kind of taking that for granted and going with this story, I think they do a really good job. So I don't really fault the show for that. I think it's like a fine thing to just accept and move on with.
any other thoughts on this episode?
Not really. I thought it was a lot of fun. I do think that, uh, I was saying this when we were opening it up. I think this is the first sign that, like, some of these universes are going to start to come together, right? We had the tentacle Shuma Gorath, or what I think is Shuma Gorath character, show up in here from episode one.
Mm.
And I think you could probably make a connection there that like maybe Captain Carter was able to fend that creature off and show up in the present because Doctor Strange weakened it, in this universe.
Between episode 1, episode 4, and also the Alan Moore comic book Watchmen, I think what we can all agree on is that tentacled creatures wield enormous amounts of power.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Energy.
Shuma Gorath again is a tentacle monster with a giant eyeball in the center that can travel between universes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's occupying that space here. And the Watcher at the end, he says, "I can't save this universe because it'll put other universes in danger." And I wonder if the Watcher is like kind of like slowly assembling a super team of what if characters, and he kind of needs this Doctor Strange, and this is kind of a way of putting him in that position to do that. I wonder if there's something a little more sly going on here, and we're going to see all these characters interact with each other at some point. Because we have kind of all these isolated heroes by the end of all these stories, who've experienced something and maybe could be brought together as a super team. I don't know. I got my money on that one.
All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this recap. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that bell icon to get a notification whenever we go live. If you want to listen to the high quality audio podcast version or support what I am doing on the internet, very easy to do that at patreon.com/Dave Chen. And if you enjoyed hearing Dan's insights on this, which I always do, check out amazingspidertalk.com. Dan Gvozden, thanks so much for joining me today, man.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I hope we get to keep doing these, but yeah, I mean, if you enjoy hearing David and I, like, help spread the word about it. We want to keep doing this with your support. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll do it this week, and obviously we've already done it. We'll do next week as well, and then we'll see where things are. But yeah, let us know if you're enjoying these, and if you are, keep coming and watching and commenting. We would appreciate it. All right, folks. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one.